Hi, everyone. Okay, so I don't have any slides, so we're gonna talk it out. So, as I was introduced, my name is EJ Maven. I'm a trained stem cell biologist, now working on the next generation of fertility technology. Before I talk about my actual talk, I wanted to go on a slight segue, actually, and loop us back into Christian's talk when he talked about the octopus eye and how it was a second eye to evolve. Okay, so slight backstory on my end, and it does tie into Darwin, is that when I grew up in Texas, my family didn't believe in evolution, and at the age of 10, when I asked for Charles Darwin's famous On the Origin of Natural Species, my dad reluctantly bought it for me, but he highlighted a very specific paragraph, and I'm going to read it out to you. To suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I confess, absurd in the highest degree. But now that we know that it's been evolved twice, that argument out the door. So, all right, everyone, so let's talk about it. So I'm going to talk about the future of fertility. I won't really talk about my company much, but if you want to know more about that, come find me after. I don't think anyone has said the word post-scarcity yet in this conference. So a post-scarcity future is one where we have an abundance of resources. This is very much the Star Trek-esque future. You only work because it's fun to, not for food or a place to live or even healthcare. And so a lot of the topics I'll be discussing really kind of revolve around that, of where resources and healthcare is not the limiting factor. One final ground rule is that I'm absolutely going to potentially simplify terms around sex, gender, family composition, and biology itself, purely for clarity, not to erase anyone. All right, let's get into it. I've been given 15 minutes to talk about the future of fertility. It's not enough time. I'm going to break it into 3 different parts, and I'll try not to talk too fast. The first one is bringing you up to speed with where we are now. Okay, so with the advent of IVF in 1978, we no longer have to have sex to have children, which is really great because now we have more control over the genetics that we can potentially pass on. It's no longer random combinations. 10 years after Louise Brown was born in 1978, 10 years after, in 1989, we were able to first do sequencing of the embryo, just very rudimentary sequencing. And then in today's world, we can actually do whole genome sequencing of each individual embryo in IVF. And that is where we first get into now when people are starting to do selection pressure on those embryos. So say, for instance, a couple has 10 different embryos, and they do whole genome sequencing on all those 10. You have 10 unique combinations, and there might be 3 different areas that couple will look at for each of those embryos, and these are kind of 3 areas I'll keep coming back to. 1 is the health of the embryo, 2 is the physical traits, and the 3rd one is the IQ. So IQ is always the most challenging to talk about when we discuss the future of humanity. And when I was talking to my faithful companion, ChatGPT, about how to talk about IQ, it literally called it ethically radioactive. I think that's pretty accurate. Okay, so what we can do now on the health side, just with today's technology, is we can actually already select against most genetic disease out there. Because if we're going to pass on a genetic condition or disease, usually we have 1 good copy and 1 bad copy, just for simplicity's sake. And so you could actually just simply choose the embryo that doesn't inherit the 2 bad copies, ergo you wouldn't have a genetic condition in your child. So that technology is already possible, even with what we have today. And the reason we still have so much genetic disease out there is it's really the accessibility issue of this kind of technology. So if there's one thing you get out from this talk, I want it to be that we can actually solve most genetic disease today already with the technology, but simply people do not have access to it. Okay, the second one is physical traits. So I'm going to introduce you to this really fascinating technology that's called forensic DNA phenotyping. And it's the idea that if you have someone's genome, you can have a pretty good idea of what they look like. And so all of a sudden now, with those 10 embryos the couple has, they can actually see and predict what that future human would look like. And this is hair color, eye color, all the way to height, facial structure, etc. The last one, the ethically radioactive one of IQ, the truth is that there's not much IQ difference you can make in a batch of 10 embryos. You're not going to really be changing it that much. When we look at sibling-to-sibling variation of IQ, you might think your little brother's a dumbass, but the reality is it's not that much different on average of IQ. And so if you're looking at a batch of 10 embryos, it's not a huge difference. That brings me to my second part of my talk, in vitro gametogenesis, which has already been referenced. And so it's the idea that you can take cells from your skin, turn them into stem cells, and make unlimited amounts of eggs or oocytes or sperm cells. And this is really what unlocks you to make potentially not just 10 embryos, but thousands, if not millions of embryos. So millions of different unique combinations. Then in theory, you could sequence all of them and figure out and really be able to choose a lot more than just those 10 initial embryos. This is really getting us into that Gattaca-esque society, if you ever watched that movie. And so now couples can not only just choose based off of the exact health that they want or having the healthiest embryo, but they can really get extreme combinations or any combination they want of physical traits, and indeed try to get that highest IQ if that's what they desire in the selection of the embryo. Before I continue, I want to make one more point about the IVG technology and why it's such a game changer. So if you can make egg cells, sperm cells from someone's stem cells, it kind of breaks the rule that you have to have a male and female to have a genetically related child. And so not only does it open the door to same-sex couples having genetically related children, but it also opens the door to uniparent families. And that's where one parent, one person, makes sperm and egg from their stem cells and has a genetically related child from both of those. This is not the same as cloning, although it might seem like it is. It also allows you to have more than two parents. So there was already reference earlier to 3-parent families, and so indeed you could get even more parents and have a genetically related child. And that also brings me to the side note of what's called this other technology that's kind of tangentially related, and that's called mitochondrial transfer technology. So in some cases, if you have, say a couple is undergoing IVF, and for whatever reason the mitochondria is not that healthy, you can actually supplement the mitochondria with another egg's mitochondria that might be healthier. And in a way, mitochondria has its own DNA, and so what you're doing here is you're actually, in a sense, improving the genetics of that embryo, but it also brings in questions of the 3-parent system, where people say, or some people have claimed that these children that have this treatment done technically have 3 biological parents because that mitochondrial DNA is from a third person. Okay, so that was what I wanted to say so far for the genetic selection technology. The very last one, the last talk I'll talk about real quick is just the gene editing part. So again, with IVG, you could get thousands, if not millions, of combinations of embryos. So what more could you want? Why would you even consider? And there's some cases that people have brought up online. So again, going with the 3 main areas. So on the health side, again, we can already remove most of the genetic disease just through the selection alone. But what's really fascinating, and some scientists have found out, is that there's what's called protective variants out there. And so these are really kind of more rare in the human population that allow people to have a much lower incidence of certain genetic diseases, or say heart disease or diabetes and things like that. And so in theory, you could edit those in to have more protection against these genetic conditions. And then on the trait side, the physical trait side, in theory, if both biological or however many biological parents you have don't have the right genetics, say for a certain hair color that a couple would really want in their children, they in theory could edit those genes in. But I would actually argue on the flip side that I'm pretty sure plastic surgery and body modifications are gonna basically outcompete or outpace our desire to genetically edit these aspects into our future children. And that's the simple truth that I don't know what hair color my future child would want, but I would love them to be able to make that decision themselves, especially if in the future we can make more permanent changes than just hair, say like hair dye itself. We could, for instance, bring in gene editing to actually edit the hair follicles directly, and then we would have permanent hair changes. And at that point, it's something adults can do. They can change throughout their life. They wouldn't have to be permanent. And the last thing is really about that IQ and making potentially smarter humans. And I hope that the talks earlier today and the talks still to come will convince you that there is a lot we can do with technology now to improve our IQ and improve our ability to think. And so, once again, I'm not too worried about people trying to use gene editing to maximize what the human brain can do, because there's so much potential outside of biology to do that. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up now. So there's three main things I wanna talk about at the very end. The first one is I could have done this whole talk on the animal side of reproduction, and so there's a lot of really amazing fun things happening over there. The second thing I'll mention is that I come from a pretty divisive family. I love to debate. Please, if you disagree with me or wanna keep the conversation going, let's make it happen. And the last thing that I'll mention is that when I talk to parents and couples and ask them about the newer technology coming out with genetic selection, maybe even gene editing in the future, the most important thing is they want their child to be healthy and happy and to have the best life that they can. And so in this very unpredictable world, parents really like to glean on something they can control, and in their mind, this is something they can control. And so that's kind of the lens that I like to think about a lot of these technologies, especially when I'm having these conversations with potential future parents. Thank you.